Hi, I'm Ophi YouTube videos, and you have probably already noticed this if you've watched any of my videos or spent any time around me at all, but I grew up on Tumblr. I make a lot of jokes about this, sometimes calling it tumblr.edu or admitting that, some of my initial understandings about how to critique media were flawed. And I blame that a lot on what I call Tumblr brain, right? I think a lot about Tumblr brain. More specifically, I think about how much signing up for Tumblr back in 2011, my second account, but the first one that I actually used for more than a week or two at a time, ultimately ended up shaping the way that I interacted with and perceived the world around me. This video is ostensibly about another Tumblr user, the one who made the Your Fave Is Problematic blog. Your Fave Is Problematic, or YFIP. Can I just say YFIP? I tried to come up with something better, but best I can do is YFIP. YFIP made and published what the author has later likened to grocery lists of misdeeds. This would have critiques of being a sex pest, a few headlines away from critiques of being a little rude on Twitter, things like that. In online discourse memes, the author gets referred to quite a lot like this firebringer of bad faith media critique or something. And I think that that is really unfair for a few reasons. So, the New York Times published an article in 2021 that is excellent and linked in the description below, that was written by the creator of the YFIP blog, in which the author says, "In the years since, I've looked back on my blog with shame and regret about my pettiness, my motivating rage, my hard and fast assumptions that people were either good or bad. Who was I to lump in together known misogynists with people who got tattoos in languages they didn't speak? I just wanted to see someone face consequences. No one who'd hurt me ever had." So the Your Fave Is Problematic blog gets heralded a lot as if it was the absolute first of its kind. It's talked about in articles, both scholarly and, other internet things, as if it was the absolute first person doing this. Like, this Tumblr user in specific had revolutionized the process of making call out posts with this format. And I think the first argument I want to make here, and something that I actually felt so strongly about, I had to respond on Twitter about, no, they didn't. Liat really truly did not invent the concept of this kind of post. I feel comfortable saying it because I was there before YFIP. Accountability posts like this, though, okay, they might not have used the exact word problematic the way that YFIP did, and might not have been hosted on blogs that were explicitly created to host nothing but posts like that. Those posts themselves did already exist, but the Tumblr search function has always been borderline unfunctional. You can sort things really easily in tags on your own blog, and then somebody searching those exact same words on the site-wide search function will just get the little Tumblr, "whoopsie, we made a fucky" error message. And that's been an issue on Tumblr for as long as I have been aware of tagging and search functions. So it made sense to aggregate these complaints onto one easily accessible page. It was the natural evolution for both how Tumblr itself worked, the limitations of the platform, and of the growing social movement and discourse that was already forming these conversations that were being collected on the YFIP blog. So to my knowledge, this was before the general internet public, meaning myself, people like me, had really an understanding of the concept of canceling or cancel culture, which is something that I now understand to have come from the Black community as a form of accountability that can be a lot more useful than what we currently see, as it has been bastardized by white people. But this was before that. This was a while ago. It was before conservatives used the word woke to angrily describe anything they didn't feel centered in. But it is kind of towards the beginning of a lot of, I think, thought organizations that later would be described as woke and having gone too far, right? So this video comes from my desire to take a couple of different sides here. Number one, I just already laid out. Liat Kaplan did not create call out posts, accountability culture, the concept of putting everything together that someone has publicly done wrong into one place. That's just not true. That's not what happened. Number two, listen, online discourse, especially at that era of Tumblr politics, tends to oversimplify things. The understanding that I gained on Tumblr as a teenage feminist is in no way my current understanding of the ideals that I hold as a feminist. However, third side, number three, all that being said, I am still so incredibly grateful to have grown up even on a flawed social justice side of Tumblr. I'm grateful to have learned how to think about things critically from there. I'm glad that I learned what I think about things and what kind of frameworks I want to use on things on Tumblr and not on 4chan or Reddit or Facebook. So, a major impetus for me in wanting to say all of this is, the amount of memes that I see that circulate that constantly say, like, oh, society if WIIP never existed with the flying cars or whatever, or directly blaming all bad media literacy on WIIP, which, okay, that in and of itself actually is a fallacy, right? Because WIIP didn't produce big lists of everything that's wrong with a piece of media. The blog, run by 6 moderators as of most recently being updated on Tumblr, focused specifically on celebrities and thought of themselves as record keepers. They didn't accept submissions with just any random list of receipts offered to them. Although I'm sure, again, this is part of a larger culture, I'm sure there were also crowd run blogs that did less vetting and that did talk about shows and media. I also don't even think that going through and talking about the things that might be wrong or not align with your values in a piece of media is inherently bad or a wrong way to engage with things. Though, if you're unable to completely shut off the critical part of your brain and just enjoy something, you might really struggle to have fun sometimes. And trust me, I am saying that from experience. It's okay to sometimes just enjoy some dumpster garbage and turn your brain off. But it is still a valuable skill to be able to ascertain the difference between dumpster garbage and fine cuisine, right? And even still, I really enjoy watching someone talk about things that might have been sexist or racist or transphobic in ways that weren't broadly understood by the culture at the time, and the conversations that happen around what used to be more acceptable than it currently is. I mean, this is pretty fundamental part of media commentary on YouTube as it is today. Although, of course, like with everything, the amount of good faith behind each criticism is going to vary from creator to creator. And I do clearly think that YouTube and commentary YouTube is a good place for constructive good faith criticism, right? I have videos about a web series that took advantage of its cast and misappropriated funds from a Kickstarter campaign to pay the producer rather than anyone who had anything to do with making it successful. I have an entire series about my perceived failings of a certain activist movement. I, like the original WIIP blog, took from publicly available sources to do that. And I really struggle to believe that just holding someone accountable for things that they decided to do publicly is intentionally making them look bad or doing something to them that they didn't do to themselves, right? But, and something that I think the author acknowledged earlier in the quote that I read from the creator of the blog, not all harm is fundamentally equal. I like the way that they got that across in their FAQ section, and this is an example of something that I would qualify as being commonly held Tumblr knowledge from that vein of social justice thought that I and the creator of the blog were kind of being forged in at the time. One of the frequently asked questions is basically, I'm not a part of the group impacted by X problematic thing listed, and I don't think it's that bad. And the answer is just simply, then you don't get a say. I think that there are plenty of things that I internalized on Tumblr that weren't great, but learning to be able to just defer to somebody else's understanding of a struggle that they face and I do not was huge for me as a sheltered, intentionally isolated, homeschooled child. And so often when I'm making the mistake of looking at the comment section on a post where someone is talking about racism or transphobia or even misogyny, people who are either not impacted by it are making that statement from earlier that they don't think it's that bad, or there are people who are impacted by those various things who then are tokenizing themselves either intentionally or unintentionally because of societal things they may not have unlearned yet. They'll make that same argument of like, well, I am part of this group and I don't think it's that bad. And I always, when I see either people making that argument, arguing from the outside, or falling for people making either of those arguments, I always have the thought of like, didn't we learn this on Tumblr at like 13? Which isn't fair because not everyone was on Tumblr or following the same blogs or anything, but it does feel like something that I and a lot of people that I will intentionally put myself in conversation with, or even just people who I tend to gravitate towards because of just, I don't know, something inherent in how we communicate. We've kind of all already discussed and processed and moved forward with the understanding of that. But again, because WIIP was part of the culture and not creating the culture itself, I won't pretend like that FAQ question isn't where anyone learned that concept. In fact, I'm sure it is, but you know, the concept itself, deferring to other people's understanding of what they know more about than you because they lived through it and you don't, is very Tumblr specific when it's phrased like you don't get a say. It's just very on point for the time period, is all. And in a lot of ways, your Fave Is Problematic does serve as more of a time capsule than it does as like a death knell for activism. Scrolling back through, I can see the creator making posts as we were all sort of trying to figure out what our language would be around things, being told to put an asterisk after trans to make it more inclusive, and then being told that actually the asterisk made some people feel even more othered. And I remember being confused about all of this too at the time as the language was sort of being hammered out. And I, like the person who created the blog, just sort of would defer to what people who knew more about this than me would say. Eventually, I think the asterisks fell out of favor while still carrying behind it the general idea, which was that trans is an umbrella category inclusive of like non binary and other gender alignments. And for a while, there was a lot of worry about accidentally putting a space where you didn't need to have a space, or that maybe not having the space was more offensive. And we've kind of, I think, relaxed a little bit on the language around it now, but at the time it was a big talking point on Tumblr, like you should put the asterisk, or that you are dog whistling if you put it all as one word. It was very much a just kind of keep your eye on the language as it irons out, and then it eventually, I think a few years ago, has sort of settled out. I don't know, correct me in the comments if you think I'm wrong on that analysis. But I say all of this to say that I've had this thought for a long time. It would have been so easy to accidentally be the person who made the Your Fave Is Problematic blog. I'm not saying that to position myself as having been that on top of the curve, or, you know, that hardworking for the amount of labor that went into assembling all of these receipts. I'm just saying, yeah, she was the first one who had the thought to aggregate it like that. something that makes sense, especially if you read that New York Times article and see that it originally came about from being something campus specific that expanded to being about public figures later. But I personally followed a whole lot of blogs like this. I also remember What Bigots Post, a similarly intentioned blog that you can figure out from the title. I think also remembering Tumblr for what it was at the time is helpful. It used to genuinely feel like this little community. We would pass around ask games and joke about having a prom and post selfies in nice outfits. And that all gets talked about as like how goofy and silly Tumblr was. But even beyond stuff like that, it really did kind of feel like a community. There were rifts between like fandom blogs and aesthetic bloggers or whatever, but there was kind of this understanding that at least anybody who cared enough to circulate an accountability post about somebody was kind of on this same corner of the internet together, somewhere where people would see what you're saying and agree with you and be like, no, yeah, that is fucked up. And I understand the creators' hesitations about WIIP after the fact, but I also don't think that we need to be acting like this person as an adult needs to carry Oppenheimer levels of shame for engaging in discourse as a teenager in the way that that discourse was happening at the time that they were a teenager. If WIIP hadn't been the first person to famously do this, there would be some teenage girl on TikTok right now, and there probably is. It's probably one of the ones who keeps putting her face with her bad takes, and maybe eventually she also will get this amount of ire, and she won't deserve it either. In that New York Times article, Liat says that posts about women tended to do very well, and I did not scroll through every single post on the Your Fave Is Problematic archive. I will own that. I did not do a full thorough research for this, but I did scroll back a bit and confirmed as I was glancing at the amount of notes that each post had. I saw that the Amanda Palmer one, for instance, did very well. That one seems to have gotten a lot of traction. And I also remember that Grey de la Seal was in controversy on the site itself. So I wasn't surprised to see a lot of notes circulating from there. Like, she was very active amongst her fans, and it took a while for people to be like, is this maybe weird? That whole thing is complicated, I think. Anyway, here's the thing, about that being complicated. If I was trying to remember more about Grey de la Seal being weird on Tumblr, I would go to Google right now and search Grey de la Seal, Your Fave Is Problematic. Search, go. And then that would bring me to a page where I can see a bunch of links to different things. So then you do that and you get a bunch of receipts and you can win an argument. And I've done that. I do that. I mean, I argue less online now, which you wouldn't imagine by watching these videos, but this is instead of arguing online. Highly recommend. Just talk about shit. You don't have to go try to change people's mind. You can just talk to people who want to hear what you have to say. Anyway, I've done that. I use that Google formula to find receipts that I need for posts that I remember people talking about if it was from the time that I knew that WIIP was active. And especially with, famous public figures, when you have a public record like that, it isn't mean of someone to just repeat the things that you said, no matter how you feel about how they were framed or that the good things also should be in there. Let's use Amanda Palmer as an example, actually, because Amanda Palmer is a lot. I actually had considered at one point scripting a whole defending women video about Amanda Palmer, but I don't know. You guys can let me know if that's something that you're interested in. The short of it, though, is I think Amanda Palmer is messy and complicated, and holy shit, I have some real issues with some things about her art. But also, I think we let male artists get away with being even more messy and complicated and holy shit, having some real issues with some things about their art, right? And the WIIP post for Amanda Palmer has a lot of receipts. But I think you could argue that some of them just don't need to be included when they're being included amongst slurs, or like the time that she used audio of her partner's reaction to her pretending to be dead in her music. Those are presented side by side with things like that there's a line in Map of Tasmania, which is a song about vaginas, that shames women who shave their vulvas. Or a link to a Tumblr post where she did a little, hey guys, I'm very enlightened and I think violence makes us all as bad as each other, so you shouldn't say that you want to hurt violent people moment. Like it was an annoying little centrist holier than thou moment or whatever, but it really isn't on par with, again, things like using slurs in her music. Or, I mean, I'm not making an Amanda Palmer call out video, so I'm not even mentioning like I have concerns about how I there's just concerns. A lot of them aren't mentioned in that blog post, and Amanda Palmer is kind of a small fish. I don't know. I just whatever. I think especially when it comes to criticizing women, we can see where an unfocused critique lets in people who do not feel like being as nuanced as us about our critique of that woman. I could even defend some other, though not all, things on this list, even though my personal list would include things that aren't even on the Tumblr blog. Specifically, though, in the Your Fave Is Problematic blog, Amanda Palmer is implied to be transphobic. And I don't want to discredit trans people who genuinely feel that way, right? As stated, it's none of my business. I don't get a say. You can definitely feel hurt by some of her portrayals of things. But I think Amanda Palmer and I, and not to over identify, even though I probably am, but I think Amanda Palmer and I might have a lot of very similar internal gender. I'm not saying that I think that the way that she sings about it and performs about it is always right in line with the kind of mindset that makes you like sweat about if you're supposed to be putting an asterisk after trans or not. But I mean, come on. Amanda Palmer hot take, there's some gender happening there. But I think there is this desire to kind of flatten out other people, especially once you're already annoyed by them, and especially once they're women, which is how you get to this bisexual woman uses they them pronouns about their partner to obfuscate their gender sooner than you get to, oh, maybe this bisexual woman is dating a he they, and that's why they said they and also boyfriend. You know, maybe they're dating a butch person who uses he they pronouns and doesn't like girlfriend, but they're a lesbian. Like, there are a million reasons that somebody might use they them to refer to their partner. This tweet is not particularly relevant to the video in question. It's just something that bothered me on Twitter recently. I don't understand the desire to want to wield that against people. Like, just be normal, maybe. But I think you have to assume that somebody is coming at something from the outside with these like awful nefarious intentions to even be able to draw that kind of conclusion that somebody dating a man would be like, well, I can't say he or else, it's whatever. It's an easy trap to fall into, though, because it's the same thing that happened with the author of the book that Love, Simon was based on, having to come out as bisexual before she was ready to do that. In popular discourse, it got assumed that it was this big, like, problematic outsider thing that she was doing. Like, she was somehow both sexualizing and sanitizing the narrative of these teen boys for her own sick, twisted pleasure. I actually really recommend the A Bit Fruity podcast episode where Matt Bernstein had the author Becky Albertelli on the podcast, and they talked about this. I genuinely did not know the extent of some of the stuff that people were saying about her, and it is really upsetting. I think she's incredibly gracious considering everything, and oh boy. I've always been defensive of Love, Simon. I think there's room, even if it had been written by a straight woman, I think there would have been room for like a sweet wish fulfillment coming out story that a well-meaning parent could read and want something to emulate. But that might be another video too, if you guys want it. Anyway, Becky had to like defend herself because her entire morals were being called into question in regards to why she had even written this. And whatever sense of superiority that we briefly got over being like, why is this straight woman writing about this, is so not worth somebody having to publicly identify with their sexuality before they're ready to. So I do think that certain things that ended up falling into the broad category that is problematic were a little bit less fair game to critique than open shows of racism, misogyny, hateful transphobia beyond she sung about being trans and hasn't maybe called herself non-binary. But I also don't think that it is the fault of the record gatherer if the people reading the records don't take the time to reinterpret and resynthesize what they read. I think that's just what happens when too much information is readily accessible. And in a way, it's not just the Tumblr era and the discourse on that website that was making WIIP bound to happen, though, the microblogging format probably did help it really take off on Tumblr. It's social media itself. It's the increasing accessibility of these celebrities who, previously maybe had either PR training not to comment on something where they would put their foot in their mouth, or, even just had a publicist there making sure that nobody was lobbing them anything but softballs. And I do think that if celebrities want increasing access to our lives and our day to day by right of being online and getting attention every time they post online, we deserve to use that online behavior to form our decisions about them and what they represent and what we want to follow. But in a lot of ways, I think we as a society have not quite, and certainly not at the time of your fave is problematic.tumblr.edu, had figured out how to quite sort through that deluge of information. But still, for a lot of us, though, for myself, and I hope for the creator of the blog, however complicated it may feel now, your fave is problematic was a really helpful jumping off point. It gave me somewhere to learn how to make those decisions and distinctions for myself, how to see a big pile of information and see which pieces of it I wanted to look into further. And I think the intention of the blog as a source of records and not as primary source autobiographies into these celebrities is really clear. But I think maybe that people who were not on Tumblr and did not understand what it was being presented as, which is, supplementary material to the publicly available version of the celebrity you're being sold, just think of it as something that it wasn't. But these lists are written assuming that you already know the public positive perception of these celebrities, so they don't and shouldn't have the requirement of stopping to praise them every time they criticize them. Anyway, I guess this one is kind of like my lesbian sheep syndrome meme video. I just see this conversation online and I think that we could be being kinder and more thoughtful about it, which is a huge intention of this channel. Not to start or be definitive about any conversation, but just to kind of stop and consider how we might like to participate in it and think about it. I really, really have loved the chance to get to have Nuance Corner time with you all over the last few weeks. If you are anywhere near my age, which is 25, did you come into this era of social justice thinking with Tumblr? And are you grateful for it? Or do you think that it was more cringe than it was helpful? I genuinely never would have met anybody who thought that reproductive justice was important at any point in my teen years if I had not been on Tumblr. I really cannot knock the website, even if I do have criticisms of cultures that spawned from it. And if you're not my age, if you're older than me, especially, and remember, anything about online call out posts and histories pre WIIP, I would love to hear about that. And if you're any age, I would love to hear about any internet figures that you would like me to pull together a nuanced defense of. You can find me on Patreon, or if you are more interested in a one-time donation than in signing up for something monthly and getting more videos out of me, you can donate to me on Ko-fi. Thank you so, so much to everybody who has already supported, whether by joining the Patreon, sending me a coffee, or just watching the video, liking, subscribing, commenting. As of last night, there are over 600 of us here, and that is so cool and so exciting. And I really love our little nuanced corner of the internet. So I will see you back here real soon. Bye.